The investigation into police corruption and collusion with politicians in South Africa has shifted to Parliament this week. An ad hoc committee is addressing allegations made by Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, who has implicated Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, currently on special leave. Meanwhile, the Nhlanhla Commission, a judicial commission of inquiry into the allegations, will resume next week. Well, joining us in the studio is Professor Theo Venter from Northwest University to unpack the latest developments. Hi Theo, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And you made a brief introduction about Nhlanhla and Parliament. It's actually two parallel processes influencing each other, and we're trying to make sense out of it, because what the one is doing is happening in terms of, let's say, the rules of engagement applied to commissions. What is happening in Parliament the last week are the politicians that's like hyenas on the police. So it's two very different processes that we're taking, but jointly, I think our discussion, what do we learn from both? I think that's the important part.
And he also fired shots at the media, saying that they should be investigated, we know, when they get leaks. So what has happened this week? Who else has he been pointing fingers at? And what about the testimony of the National Police Commissioner, Fanny Masamolo?
Yeah, I think the evidence leader at the Nhlanhla Commission managed General Mkhwanazi far better than the evidence leader in Parliament. The evidence leader in Parliament is well-known SC, is Silk, an advocate, but he gave Mkhwanazi a lot of latitude. And of course, being among the politicians this week, early this week, I think it was Monday, he really used that opportunity to fire broad and wide. And I think one of the things you mentioned was his reference to one or two journalists, not the media in general, but like all generals and people like him, they generalize this kind of collective them doing something to the police. And the two people that he specifically referred to, according to him, had information that they were not privy to. And his solution for that was an investigation by the State Security Agency, or in your case, MI5 or MI6, to investigate the journalists, which of course is a stupid thing to do. But I think when we deal with Mkhwanazi, we must have a perspective on this man. He's a young, fired up general. He has done fairly well in his career. He has been acting commissioner of police about 10, 12 years ago at a very young age. And he is one of those typical military trained or military minds. You get them in the police, you get them in the military, you get them all over the security world, that can only see in white and in black. Their ability to have a look at the nuanced world, the world of grays, in which most of us operate, that's very limited. So when he sees this, for instance, in one of his responses, referring to the KwaZulu-Natal unrest of 2021, he even suggested that there was a need to close down the social media in toto. Now, that you find in authoritarian and totalitarian states, but that is the typical mind of a military man that we heard. And therefore, we need in this world civilian oversight over the military. We're not talking about the US, but some of that is happening in the United States at the moment. The fact that the civilian oversight is militarized means that the military is now in a very difficult spot, and that is something one should prevent.
And it's also interesting, he points the beginning of the rot in the South African police back to basically the 2007 ANC Polokwane conference. So, to Zuma.
Well, in that sense, most of the things that Mkhwanazi is saying, I think, should be dealt with as allegations. It will unfold over time, but there we are in the same movie. What happened at Polokwane was that Jacob Zuma and the Jacob Zuma faction of the ANC closed the Scorpions down. Now, the Scorpions were erected, developed, designed with influence from the CIA, from the FBI, from the British security establishment. And what they did was they developed, I would call it interdisciplinary teams, people from justice, people from forensics, people from the police, your detectives, and so on and so on. So when they got a case, they got all these disciplines ready to make sure that the evidence is in the right form, it's done it the right way, it's taken to court in the right. So they were very effective. But the biggest sin that they committed were they established that our deputy president, president to be soon, Jacob Zuma, was rotten to the core. What Zuma did with his lackeys was to close down the Scorpions. Now, the one thing the Scorpion design had was they reported directly to the president, to the head of state. They did not report to a minister in cabinet. In other words, a secondary reporting function. So what they did after Polokwane, they established the Hawks as the replacement of the Scorpions with a reporting line to the Minister of Police. Now that undermined the Hawks, and that's really what he's referring to. And in discussions yesterday and today, the politicians peppered the Commissioner of Police, Fanny Masemola, about this issue of reporting lines. They peppered him. For instance, one of our well-established members of the DA, Glenys Breitenbach, challenged him directly, saying, "Sir, you're the top cop. If a political appointee, the Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, tells you to do something that's illegal, you should have the guts to tell him, no, sir, I'm not going to do it." But she challenged him, and he had to admit that he didn't do that. He kind of rode the wave to see if it's not going away. And afterwards, Malema, which I think built onto what Glenys Breitenbach did, gave him some acknowledgement, saying, okay, I accept that you've got your own style. Back to Glenys Breitenbach, that's the right way to do it. If the minister is in breach of his role, the Commissioner of Police must have the ability to say so or to give some pushback. I do not think our current Commissioner of Police is up to it. As a matter of fact, from all the people presenting in front of Nhlanhla Commission and in Parliament, Masemola, to me, is looking the weakest of the lot.
True. And is this concluding today in South Africa now? And then it goes back to the Nhlanhla Commission.
The Nhlanhla Commission is resuming on Monday, and I think they're resuming in a in-camera session. In other words, now all the secrets will be shared and so on and so on, so the media is not there. And there was also a request that some of the sessions in Parliament must be held in camera. Now, that is far better in camera because you've got a lot of politicians and they love leaking. So we will definitely know what's going on there, because I see while they're sitting in Parliament, they're more on their phones than anything else. And sometimes it seems to me that the questions that they so nicely formulate is done for them by phone. But I'm just joking. Maybe they really have those nicely formulated questions in front of them. No, it's going on. The difference between the two, the Commission and Parliament, Parliament has got exactly a month, and then they must tell the legislature, or this ad hoc commission, then they must tell the legislature, Parliament, what to do, the way forward. The Nhlanhla Commission has got 3 months, and then they must provide an interim report, and then another 3 months for a final report. So both of them are pressed for time. But I think the biggest, let's call it fun. It's not really fun, but the biggest fun to watch, of course, is what happens in Parliament.
And of course, there was a raid on the house of another top cop, the Deputy National Police Commissioner, Shadrack Sibiya. So was that just a raid? He wasn't arrested? Why are they looking for him?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question that you're posing. Up to about, I would say, 2-3 weeks ago, there was a very slow movement in any of the big cases. There was a slow movement, even enough time for 3 or 4 books to be published on corruption at the Tembisa Hospital. The other book was about the network of organized crime, and there was another book. But so the journalists had a year or two to get the stuff together and to publish. And then suddenly, now that the Nhlanhla Commission is sitting, Parliament is taking this thing serious, in the last week or two, suddenly there's a huge lot of movement. Certain people can't get bail. Others get bail of about 400,000 Rand. Now, that's not big in pounds, but in Rand value, it's huge. It's one of the highest bails that I've picked up in the last. Previously, I thought a bail of 200,000 is maybe a huge amount, but providing somebody with bail of 400,000 tells me that the judge is of the opinion that they've got a very strong case in this case. And then there was a raid on Sibiya's house, the one general that's currently suspended. And there was also attacks or investigations into other places. They even went as far as going to the Minister Mchunu's house, but he wasn't there, so they couldn't get into his house. So there's a lot of things happening. And I think the police are doing this to show that they are really in control. And that brings me to a point, because all of these things, the underlying question is, what's going on? Is it a triangle of a crime network, the police and politicians? Or is it an infighting in the police that developed into a network? Is it the politicians that started with it and then it flow into? It's a complicated triangle to unbundle or to unpack, and I think that is really what we're waiting for. And already in this week, and I'm sure this wasn't planned, we also had the tragic death of one of the ministers of police, Nathi Mtetwa, which this afternoon, the commissioner of police said, according to him, what really happened was after Polokwane that we have just discussed, Nathi Mtetwa and Jacob Zuma worked together to undermine crime intelligence. Now, crime intelligence seems to be in ICU in South Africa for a very long time. And he mentioned things. He mentioned practical things which I never thought he would. He said, well, when he took over and they had to get a car that Jacob Zuma was using that belonged to crime intelligence. They had to take back a vehicle that the Minister of Police was using, and they had to take back vehicles used by senior management as if they can have these things. And then, according to him, that is an ongoing process where they're trying to recoup some of the things that actually became a given in crime intelligence. So that, I think, is the big problem.
Well, you talked about General Fanny Masemola. So what do you think, if you look at all this, what should happen at the police? I know it's early days and we've got to wait till the end of the commission. What should happen? Because you said he seems to be the weakest link, and there is this problem of interference of politicians. What should we get? Have a police minister from another party to stop this link between, the ANC and top people in the police?
I think that would be helpful to get the Government of National Unity involved in police. I think that would be a very interesting idea. I'm not sure the ANC or Cyril Ramaphosa is up to it. But in a sense, the current problem is going to resolve itself in a way, because Masemola's 5-year term is ending early next year. The same with Mkhwanazi. The same with Kumalu. Now, what's happening in the police, you're permanently appointed as a policeman, but your appointment in that senior position is a term appointment, a 5-year term appointment. And when that term expires, you remain a policeman. If you're not yet 60, you can stay on in any other position, basically at the same level, but you don't hold that position anymore. So all of these guys involved will have to be rotated early next year. And then I personally think Senzo Mchunu will not return. And I'm not an advisor to the president, but if he were to listen to me, I'll tell him, listen, convince Senzo Mchunu to resign. Once he has resigned, you can then decide. There's an opening currently in Paris for an ambassador. You can appoint him in Luthuli House. You need an organizer for next year's election. There are many jobs he can do apart from being in cabinet. And I also think Sibiya is not going to survive this investigation. They had to reappoint Sibiya because he was fired wrongly, and that I acknowledge. He was thrown under the bus by the Guptas and the Zumas of that time. So the Labour Court decision in 2020, I think, said he must be reappointed at the same scale and all other things. So that's how he got reappointed. But I think he will not survive this investigation.
Will it help if there are these new appointments? Because it seems that, corrupt policemen seems to be endemic in South Africa.
Let me be positive about this, because in this case, being negative is so easy. Everybody is. But let's see if we can identify the other side of the coin. Yeah, I think new blood is definitely going to make a difference. And I think with the history and with the recommendations of Parliament as well as the Nhlanhla Commission, whoever is chosen as a police commissioner, I think that sieve through which they'll have to go will be much finer. I don't think we will see a Ria Piecha, a previous commissioner that came from outside. I don't think we will see a Jackie Selebe, a politician that was made an administrator. The two police commissioners before this one, Sithole and the one before him, were both in some way implicated in maladministration, if not corruption. So they'll have to search. There are good policemen. There are honest policemen that are doing their work. And I think the big problem here, and it was shown by Glenys Breitenbach, that if the ruling party, the ANC in this case, they empower already for 31 years. Now, the last year, they were not really in power, but they acted as if they empower. They really acted in the government of national unity as if they've got 2/3 of the vote. That's the acting that they're doing. But they've got 40%, we all know, 40% and declining. So I think if that relationship between the ruling party and your officials are moved a little bit further apart, because until the government of national unity, it would have been impossible for somebody to get a senior rank in the police and get a senior position like a provincial commissioner or a national commissioner if you're not a member of the ANC. It wasn't an instruction. It wasn't written anywhere. It was just the understanding. I think what we are seeing now will probably bring a distance between the two. And what I like about Mkhwanazi, despite all the accusations and the allegations he's making, he doesn't seem like a political animal. He seems like an honest policeman that can see things in one way. Fanny Masemola seems far more the political appointee, somebody that can't say things about politicians and that can't say things that does not seem to be in line with the ruling party. So the police and these issues in the police are actually an indication of where we are in South Africa on other levels as well.
Well, so we should get ANC cadre deployment out of the police, you say. But Mkhwanazi seems to have a bit of an authoritarian streak. You know, what he said about WhatsApp and what he said about journalists who would leak leaking documents.
Let me just give you some perspective. If I listen to the current head of the FBI in the United States, I see the same kind of mentality. So that is to be expected. And I don't think it's wrong to have that kind of approach when you're in the police or in security. But like I said, therefore you need civilian oversight. And I think Parliament is as deep in trouble as the police because they didn't do their oversight properly. They didn't ask the difficult questions. They didn't challenge the police. So I think it's on the one side civilian oversight. I mean, if you listen to the way in which the Senate is doing their oversight about some federal departments, this is brutal. We haven't seen that, and I think we can expect more of that in our current Parliament.
Professor Theo Venter, thank you so much.
Pleasure as always.